if you had been in the Bay Area or New York and been the darlings of the venture capital industry, do you think the company would be as successful as it is today?
No, not at all. I think capital constraints put some very realistic pressure on companies, and that pressure builds diamonds. When you back a dog into a corner, they're going to fight like hell to get out of it, right? The same is true in our DNA. And I think the way our strategy has evolved, the way that business has evolved, and if you don't have that external pressure on the business to generate the revenue, generate the impact, generate the traction that you need to build a sustainable company, you end up wasting a ton of venture capital dollars on your initial singular mindset, which oftentimes is the wrong product or the wrong pathway or the wrong business to build. And so that capital constraint, I think, provided a world of benefit.
Welcome to another episode of Outsider Inc. I'm your host, Ian Hathaway. Today's guest is Jon Lensing, the co-founder and CEO of OpenLoop, a telehealth infrastructure platform headquartered in Des Moines, Iowa. Since its humble beginnings in 2020, OpenLoop has scaled to serve more than 2 million patients annually with 16,000 clinicians across all 50 states. The company has raised over $120 million in funding and was recently valued at over $1 billion. Jon's path to becoming a founder was anything but typical. After growing up in a small town in rural Iowa, he trained as a physician and seemed headed for a career in surgery before deciding to forgo residency and build a tech company instead. From recruiting doctors out of a grocery store cafe to navigating a pandemic pivot that completely reshaped the business, Jon's story is a powerful example of the perseverance and resilience required to build big outside the traditional tech hubs and founder backgrounds. I'm really looking forward to discussing his leap of faith into entrepreneurship, the roller coaster of scaling from the Midwest, and what it takes to grow a culture of grit and innovation while tackling one of the biggest challenges of our time, making healthcare more accessible. Jon Lensing, welcome to Outsider Inc.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Ian.
It's good to see you. It's been a minute. I'd like to start from the top with some big news that you have. OpenLoop, the telemedicine infrastructure platform you created 5 years ago, recently closed a fresh round of capital that places the company at a valuation of over $1 billion. I know that achieving lofty valuations isn't why you're in business. You're doing it to serve your customers and to create this enduring impact. But even so, it's an incredible feat and it's a testament to your leadership. How does it feel to prove that billion-dollar tech companies can be built in Iowa?
I think it's a testament to the overall leadership and all the employees at OpenLoop who contribute every single day. We're hell-bent on making care far more convenient and therefore more accessible. And when you accomplish both those things, you make healthcare ubiquitous. As far as the valuation goes, we're not flashy by any means. We haven't made any announcements about it. We're just heads down trying to deliver the best healthcare experience out there. We started the company, my co-founder and I, in the state of Iowa because he's from Missouri, I'm from Iowa. We wanted to do something to get back to the Midwest. We contemplated moving to San Francisco. New York was calling to us as well, but firmly believed in our roots. And that's the reason why we started it. We wanted to address a lot of the accessibility issues for rural America, and that just happened to be where we were from. And so it made sense to live in the middle of the pain while we were trying to build the solution for it.
Going back to those roots, you grew up on a farm in Otley, Iowa, an unincorporated town with a population of just a few hundred people. I know you drive 20 minutes or so every day to get to school in nearby Pella. You were a part of a graduating class of 65 students or so. That's a pretty isolating experience for most people. And yet it turns out that it's one of the most critical factors in your journey to building OpenLoop. As a kid, you would see patients drive 3, 4, 5 hours away just to see your dad, who was a local OBGYN. And that was an experience that, had an impact on you and sparked your interest in expanding access to care. Your dad urged you not to go into medicine. You ultimately did. How do you reconcile that contradiction of being pulled towards his example of providing care to people who really didn't have too many options, but then also being warned away from his path of following the medical profession?
I mean, for starters, I've never been a good listener. My dad, who's now retired, he found medicine incredibly rewarding when he started. But during his lifetime in medicine and during his career, he witnessed a lot of changes, and a lot of them that he did not think were to the benefit of the practitioners or the patients, only to the benefit of payers and other regulatory bodies. And so what he deemed as fun and rewarding in medicine became rules, paperwork, necessary guidelines, and just red tape after red tape after red tape. And so having watched me grow up, understanding what my personality was, he knew that I would not enjoy the new culture of medicine, but part of me still resonated with a lot of what drew him to medicine, the empathetic side of helping somebody, watching people in the grocery store come up to him and say, "Thank you for saving my child. You know, that was a high risk pregnancy. I wouldn't be here. My kid would not be here if it wasn't for you." Watching the joy that provided him. And I, in school, tended towards the math, the science, the engineering types of subjects. And so that all sort of culminated in not listening to his advice and pursuing a career in medicine, and really decided I liked surgery, wanted to go down that route. Not a lot of surgeons in rural Iowa to provide those services, so thought I could give back in that way. So I started OpenLoop as really this passion project during the last year of medical school, with the last 6 months that I had, to address a lot of the accessibility issues within rural America. How do you make care more prevalent? How do you bring it to those people who still really enjoy the agrarian lifestyle, working the earth, farming day in and day out, raising livestock, but that are 45 minutes to 2 hours away from the nearest medical center? And that nearest medical center oftentimes doesn't have the most robust of services. They may need to go even further. And so that passion project slowly morphed itself into OpenLoop. And when it got to that point of, do I continue on with my clinical training throughout residency, or do I do this full time? It was a pretty easy decision for me. Do I want to see 20 patients a day in clinic, or 4 to 5 patients a day in surgery, and end up treating the exact same cases for the next, 30 years of my life? Or do I think that I could have a larger impact reimagining how healthcare should be done that's more beneficial to the practitioners and, more importantly, more beneficial to the patients, and thereby change how we think healthcare is delivered? And once you put those two things side by side, it became a relatively easy decision.
So it sounds like your father loved the practice of medicine, but was concerned about the business of medicine. You went to college in Michigan. You also ultimately went to and completed medical school back in Iowa. There were entrepreneurial signs in you before you got to that point, thinking about ways to build scalable solutions. I know in college you founded a drone company. Also, while you were in medical school, you worked at what has turned out to be one of the top agricultural tech companies in Iowa, Swine Tech. So there were always kind of these signs for you while you were pursuing this education in math and science and medicine. You were building companies. What kind of inspired those early entrepreneurial experiences for you? Do you think those were hints or indications of things to come? What did you learn from those experiences?
Oh boy. Let's see. The first entrepreneurial endeavor that I can remember, I don't know if you remember, back in like the early 2000s, you remember those Live Strong bands, the yellow rubber bands you'd wear? So those were starting to gain some traction. I think I was in like 4th or 5th grade at the time. And I convinced my mom. I gave her like $20. And I said, "Hey, I don't have a credit card, but I need to order these online. Can you order them for me with your credit card?" They were $1 a piece. So she bought me 20 of them. I went back through grade school the next day and I sold them for like $5 a piece. Ran out in like 2 days. Went back, got another order of like 50, did the same thing over and over again. And I was like, this is kind of fun, right? This is like the first sort of endeavor into business, just some simple arbitrage, but it was supply and demand thing because nobody else had credit cards at that time point. The next one that I had was in middle school. It was like a geology science project where you could turn in, a recipe on how to make rock candy. I ended up like tweaking the recipe slightly. And what resulted was a candy that was a little less solid than rock candy. So my classmates loved it. So I started a small candy business. In high school, I did something else, like a landscaping and lawn company. And then college, like you mentioned, I did a drone company. Everything just sort of followed passions or what I found interesting at the time. And then come medical school, startups had always intrigued me. It's just like, taking an idea from formation level, building a team around it who are so mission driven that they execute day in and day out to achieve this grand vision, right? Seeing Uber's success, seeing Airbnb, they had such a lasting impact on the industry that people create verbs out of them like, hey, I'm going to Uber from here to there now, right? Or I'm just going to Airbnb that. And so, I wanted to get my feet wet in that. And I was like, great, we're in Iowa. Ag tech companies make a lot of sense. But this one was working on healthcare for livestock. So jumped into that one with a buddy from high school. Now, the last part of your question, what did I actually learn throughout all that? I learned two things. One, I don't like following rules. So that's why I like starting my own company. And two, I hate monotony. And so being able to sink my teeth into a million new problems a day, that's what was really appealing about it. So you marry those two things with the impact that healthcare has and the empathetic side of healthcare, and it's a winning combo.
It all seems to kind of make sense on paper when you think, what's the point of going through medical school just to go and launch a company? But for you, it sounds like it was very obvious that you were not going to go on and practice medicine. Was anyone else surprised at your decision?
I don't think surprised. Did they have advice against doing it? Oh, absolutely. My mom's a Vietnamese refugee. Met my dad in college, who was a son of some very poor hog farmers up in northeastern Iowa. And when my mom came over as a refugee, she came with nothing. Dad really had nothing growing up. And so they have this mindset of being very frugal, safe, and secure, which has afforded me the privilege and the benefit of not having that same mindset in a lot of ways, right? Like, they've done well enough for themselves. They've lived out their own American dream. And the thing that they passed on to us kids was, you have the ability to do anything you want, do it with caution. And so their advice is like, look, you've got all the way to this point. There's a safe, secure lifestyle that is rewarding and purpose building within medicine. You're already at that point. Why not finish it? But the other half of me was like, I got to do this. I'm young enough. Let's take the risk. The thing that you, mom and dad, have taught me is that the most valuable skill that we have as individuals is critical thinking. And if it doesn't work out here, then great. I can go find a career back in medicine. I can go find a career in some other field. So I'm not worried. I even thought about dropping out prior to graduating medical school. And the administration's like, please don't hurt our numbers. So, just finish it at least. We don't know how to handle this situation because nobody's done this. If you go to Stanford Medical School, that's a completely different thing. A lot of people graduate and go into investment banking, do medical startups, et cetera. But University of Iowa, completely different. I think my classmates, when I told all of them, I was definitely the black sheep because nobody else is doing that. Everybody else is going on to residency. But I don't think they were surprised. They also had advice against it. Like, what are you giving up? Are you going to miss the practice of medicine? And some of those thoughts that they had did come to fruition. There are days where I very much miss the practice of medicine. There's probably one day a week where I miss being in the operating room and actually working with my hands and doing surgery. But at the same time, I meet with our chief medical officer very frequently, sometimes daily. And I still get that inkling of practicing medicine in some ways.
So definitely pressures to not follow your path. Ultimately, you finished school, you did forgo residency, and you pursued this idea. Early days were not easy or glamorous. I'm sure the naysayers felt validated early on. I know you've talked about writing letters to doctors to get them on the platform, working out of a Hy-Vee café, which for listeners outside the Midwest, it's literally like a cafe inside of a grocery store. You hustled your way into the first Techstars cohort in Iowa. Let's go back to those very early days. What were some of those scrappy beginnings? What was kind of the initial vision? And how did those early experiences really shape the DNA of what the company is today?
I've reflected on this a lot. Christian and I were handwriting letters, 300 of them to be exact, went and bought all the stamps, sat there for hours, just getting our initial cohort of doctors to sign up. We bought like a $20 mailing list off of some list site that gave us the physicians in Iowa. We got 0 responses, but we had 1 person sign up. So it just seemed like all that stuff just went down the drain. Working at a Hy-Vee cafe, beneficial because if you got hungry, great. You go walk down the aisles, buy a snack, come back, sit down and get back to work. Then we got our first office. It was a sublet within a larger office, but our office was 10 feet by 10 feet. And we had a mini fridge and an old bun coffee pot for my parents, and we felt like we made it. And then things just started snowballing and growing from there. One of the things with building companies in non-traditional places like Des Moines, Iowa, is you don't get the same level of interest from external investors. I was not independently wealthy. My co-founder was not independently wealthy. I used student loans to start this thing and build our first product. And so at some point we knew that if we want this thing to have the impact that we want, we need to go raise venture capital dollars. And call after call after call. If we weren't in the Bay, nobody thought twice about us. So rejection after rejection after rejection. Fortunately enough, just through the Midwest community of neighbor helping neighbor, got introduced to some wealthier individuals who took a chance on us. They risked a little bit of money, put up the early capital. But that was not a traditional seed round or even pre-seed round of any sort of Silicon Valley company, right? We're talking a fifth the size of a round that somebody else would go raise, or a 10th or a 20th for some of these rounds that I've seen lately. And that became a recurrent theme throughout OpenLoop. The big VC, the name brand VC firms, even after growth, even after traction, still wouldn't invest. And so the underlying premise here is that we've been capital constrained from day one. Frankly, we still are relatively capital constrained for the size of business and the impact of the business that we've built today. But the only thing that fueled was a very scrappy mentality. How do you do far more with far less resources than anybody else in the space? Which means we've had to optimize, we've had to be efficient, we've had to think about profitability before a lot of other companies would do that, and trying to balance high growth with profitability. That also dictated sort of the DNA of the company, right? We are a company of ruthless work ethic, scrappiness, and fire eating. Every single day of this company, we have been under-resourced from finances, but more importantly, headcount. Like the amount of work that our team consumes, like you have to be able to eat fire. You have to be able to digest 5x the amount of problems that another company built in the Bay or built in New York would have more than enough manpower and resources to handle. And so that's how we still think about different things. When we're starting new initiatives or testing different ideas that we have, it's like limited budget, internal resources getting dedicated to it, and they're hell bent on making it work.
If you had been in the Bay Area or New York and been kind of the darlings of the venture capital industry, do you think the company would be as successful as it is today?
No, not at all. I think capital constraints put some very realistic pressure on companies, and that pressure builds diamonds. It's like when you back a dog into a corner, they're going to fight like hell to get out of it, right? The same is true in our DNA. And I think the way our strategy has evolved, the way that business has evolved, you could view it as a series of some really significant pivots, but then a bunch of more micro pivots along the way. Some people might call it chasing opportunity. I would say it was calculated opportunity risk taking. And if you don't have that external pressure on the business to generate the revenue, generate the impact, generate the traction that you need to build a sustainable company, you end up wasting a ton of venture capital dollars on your initial singular mindset, which oftentimes is the wrong product or the wrong pathway or the wrong business to build. And so that capital constraint, I think, provided a world of benefit.
Constraints lead to creativity. You hinted earlier you weren't doing this alone. Your co-founder, Christian Williams. I know you both. Obviously, we crossed paths at Techstars, had the opportunity to be a lead mentor for you during that program. You're so different, the two of you. When I'm evaluating a founding team for investment, it's not just who's the superstar or who's one individual. It's the complete team and how do they complement each other. I'd love to hear about how you see those co-founder dynamics and any practical tips you have for founders out there about getting to that early fundamental understanding of who each other is, why that's so valuable so that you can ultimately build in a high trust environment that's required for scaling at this pace.
I'm not sure I'm the best person to give advice on that. The way that Christian and I's relationship came to be was Imagine going on a 5-minute speed date with somebody and you decide 15 minutes later that you're going to get married. That was how our relationship came about. We had a mutual mentor. We were both building our companies, still sort of like business ideation stage. We were both looking for co-founders. This mutual mentor was like, hey, you two just should meet up. I chased him down, emailed him, I think 5 or 6 times before he finally responded back and agreed to meet me at a Starbucks. We had a quick 45-ish minute meeting, probably shared our business ideas, philosophy on a whim. He's like, fine, I'll come join you if you want. And handshake deal. And we were off to the races. One meeting at a Starbucks, 45 minutes. Now 5 years later, match made in heaven. Couldn't have asked for a better co-founder. I think personality dynamics are an incredibly important part of successful founding teams. I'm a less detail-oriented person than him. I'm a lot more head in the clouds. My responsibilities from the get-go were always external-facing things. So things like interacting with clients, sales, marketing, roll up to me. Anything having to do with investor and board relations. So I'm the fundraiser. I'm the one who runs the board meetings, HR. So those were sort of my domains. Christian was very methodical, detail-oriented, crack the whip kind of guy. And so he was always internal-facing stuff. So think about all the operations.
I know Christian to be that way as well. What do you think made him want to do this with you?
There's a loneliness that comes with being an entrepreneur. And you want somebody just to share those struggles with. I could scroll back through our Slack channels from the get-go, and there's a million instances where one of us is just like, dude, what the hell are we going to do? How are we going to get through this? Like, I'm worried. I'm stressed, right? And then you always have the counterbalance. It's up to the other person to talk you off the ledge, get you back on track. And I think that's what we give each other in a lot of ways. He had a company that had some really good initial traction. He gave it all up because I think he wanted to build something with somebody else. And that's just fundamentally what it came down to for us.
We've talked a little bit about those early days. Today, OpenLoop looks very different from that initial vision. Some of that early pushback you got was, are we creating a rural staffing platform, essentially, for healthcare? Uber for nurses, basically, was the original vision. Then I distinctly remember, I can picture us on Zoom having this conversation of like needing to pivot the company, not in a subtle way. This was a fundamental shift that you needed to make. Tell us a little bit about like going through that. It's a risky proposition. It ultimately worked out. For founders out there listening, what's it like to go through a dramatic pivot so early on? Just kind of the thought process for when it's a good idea, when it's not, how it worked for you.
I think people view pivots as an all or none sort of thought process. And that's not the way that we viewed it. COVID was a massive accelerant to our original business idea during the early stages, called the first 60 days. And then post 60 days, it was a massive deterrent to the point where we were getting no traction whatsoever underneath that old business. So we had this inkling that we could do some really good work within telehealth or the digital health space because it's becoming so much more prevalent during that pandemic era. And so all we said was, let's test it. We have this hypothesis. Let's go out and collect some data on it, and then we're going to make a decision. But in the meantime, we're not going to drop the current business. So we did that. We went out, we built a business model that was very much akin to what we had been doing originally, added in some new elements that we thought would resonate well. We went to market with it. We were signing clients left and right. Sales cycle was much shorter. We could actually get in contact with those decision makers quicker than the hospital ones we were. And very quickly, we got to like 50% of the revenue that our traditional business had done in like 45 days time. What it took us, 6 months of time to build up in our old business. And so that was sort of the light switch for us. We said, okay, we're going to put all of our new go-to-market stuff in this new strategy. And that's what we did. Externally, it looks like a pretty hard pivot. Internally, it was a calculated test with limited data. If you are a very data-driven person, startups are not for you. What you have to be comfortable with is having 51% of the information that you'd like to have, and then the other 49% is gut instinct. That same sort of mentality we hold true today. Everybody wants to say that, oh, look, that person threw a bunch of shit at the wall and saw what sticks. I say that we do that internally, but I think it's a little bit more calculated than that. We throw a bunch of shit at the wall and see what sticks, but we're looking at the center of where we were aiming, and what stuff stuck around that center. Right? That's being strategic about opportunities. You're not deviating too far from your center, but you're picking on the things that are resonating well within the market that are around that core. And so we still do that today. We may test something within that. And if we get the data that we like limited, we'll make a gut instinct to start putting more resources into that. We're not afraid to shut it down either if it doesn't pan out.
This is a theme for you where maybe a decision may not make sense to others at the time, but to you, you're following your instincts to not go into practicing medicine, your instincts to jump in with Christian, your instincts to make this pivot, but using data to inform that decision-making process. We had another guest on, Wade Foster from Zapier, and he said, a lot of the advice I got was wrong. And when I received advice early on that I knew was wrong, it made me doubt all the other things that people were telling me. So how do you make those decisions versus like what investors might be wanting you to do? How do you weigh those external factors?
That's a really complicated question. It's a really good one. I like to triage things. So you'll get a variety of different opinions, but if you get a high enough sample size, then you can find major themes in it. Oftentimes I'd ask, 5 to 10 people the exact same question. I get 5 to 10 different answers on paper, but if you reread them, there's stuff that's said between the lines that had recurrent themes. And so you start to pull on those things so you can make better decisions. There's the old adage that time kills all deals. And that means everything from just a sales contract to companies as a whole if you don't execute on a strategy quick enough. And so it's limited data, but just enough where you get an inkling to then make your own final decision. I think you have to balance that with a level of conviction that you have internally. So as a founder, you have to realize that nobody else is going to know your particular market. Nobody knows the problems you're trying to solve better than you. And so if your conviction for something is off the charts, but you have absolutely no data on it, you're going to follow that. If you have 100% conviction on something and a few people are telling you, maybe that's not a good idea, but you can't get any concrete reasons from them at why that's not a good idea, you're going to do it. If people are all telling you it's an absolutely horrible idea and you have minimal conviction about it, you're going to steer clear of it. I think it's this balancing of triaging the people that you trust around you. And that could be clients, that can be advisors, it could be board members, but people that you trust for your particular industry with your level of conviction on things. But there's really nothing formulaic about it. There's also a lot of people who give you advice on startups. There's a million books on how to build startups, but until you actually go through it yourself, it doesn't resonate. It doesn't click. So, a lot of those things you think they're avoidable, but you got to experience them yourself.
You touched on a few different things, trusting partners, having conviction, even time-killing deals. You've obviously been successful raising capital, but I know there were some close calls. There was a story about having a term sheet pulled. The term sheet was expiring at midnight. You kind of stared at it all day, signed it at the last minute, maybe against your instincts. Wake up in the morning, finding out that term sheet was pulled. You were out of money. Talk through that story with us. Why were you reluctant to sign that term sheet? What pushed you over the edge to actually go do it? And then what came next?
There's moments of like every startup journey that you just will never get erased from your memory. I remember the exact time. I remember looking at my phone and seeing what time of the night it was. I remember exactly where I was sitting. I remember where Christian was sitting. I remember the conversation that we were having. Like, it's so visceral and vivid still. It was late one evening. We had a term sheet that had a 24-hour expiration on it. The investor hadn't made us feel comfortable. The partner running it was just not giving us strong conviction. But we were at a point in the company where we had zero other options. We were dwindling cash. This was a Thursday evening. The next morning, we weren't going to make payroll. We were going to have to let go of like 40 to 45 people and just go back to brass tacks of Christian and I only and just try to scrape by and get it going. And so it was that route or sign the term sheet, get the cash in the bank and keep rolling. I signed with 5 minutes to spare. Wake up the next morning at like 5:30. They were on Eastern time zone. Said, hey, we're back on this deal. We're not going to do it. Thankfully, this wasn't our first round of financing. So we had some individual angels who were very convicted about the company still. And we had already circulated the term sheet with a lot of those folks and see who would want to participate on that term sheet. And one of them did. And, He was our board chair at the time, wealthier individual from Iowa who mentored Christian and I early on as well. And he had already mailed me a handwritten $200,000 check that he was going to use to participate pro rata into that round. And I hate to even admit it, but without his permission, I went to the bank the next morning and cashed it just to make payroll, even though our term sheet had been pulled. I had a conversation with him that same afternoon, and he said, hey, you should go cash my check anyway. Like, regardless of what comes from this term sheet, I want to help the company. He said, we'll consider a short-term loan until you get the next term sheet. And so that's the way we papered it up after I did it.
Do you really think they did you a favor in the end by pulling that term sheet?
I think so. I think they did us a favor because the next week, by sheer happenstance, there was a VC group called Springtide that happened to be meeting at the University of Iowa. And the chief innovation officer there, John Darcy, said, hey, you should go look at this healthcare company in Des Moines on your way through. So they rented a car, drove an hour and a half to Des Moines, came and saw us. And then 48 hours after their meeting with us, we had a term sheet from them. And it was better terms than we had just had the last week. And these guys were incredibly convicted about our thesis. It aligned exactly with what they were looking for. And they have been some of the best partners that we've had in the business. When I call up our board member who represents Springtide, every single time he answers, Jon Lensing support team, how can I help? And so incredibly beneficial, helped us in the long run. I think it put a chip on both Christian and I's shoulder to be more wary with the investors that we get into bed with. And so we're very choosy now. And I think that's been to our benefit. I don't know if we would have ended up in the same spot had we had that same investor.
Any advice practically how founders can evaluate their investors, what's worked for you, or maybe how to think about this feeling like you've got to raise this money or the company is going to die versus getting into business long-term with partners that don't have a mutual conviction is actually going to kill the business anyway?
Not all capital is created equal. Investors will pitch you on their value add, what they can bring to the table, what their network looks like. Frankly, it's a bunch of bullshit. Until you actually see it and rubber meets road, like the only thing you can evaluate them on is their personality. So there's a couple of things that I do. I like to spend a lot of time with the investors, and I want them to mirror what our own internal operating culture is. Is this somebody who's a fire eater? Is this somebody who has their nose to the grindstone? Are they cut from the exact same cloth that both Christian and I are? So, for example, Springtide, they were first-time fund managers. Our Series A, led by Nava Ventures, again, first-time fund managers. Both of those VCs, their entire career depended on making sure their first fund did well. So they work like hell now to make sure that we are successful, bend over backwards to make introductions, leverage any sort of resource that they can to make sure that OpenLoop sees success. But that's more of a lagging indicator, right? Like, so the only thing you can assess at the beginning is who are they as a person? What is their personality? Are they aligned with you? And then I like to try a little bit of a test. One of my investors, I happen to be in the area, and I asked him, hey, can you get me in at this restaurant? And he worked like hell, but eventually got me in at a restaurant that I wanted to go to. And the restaurant was out of my budget, but it was more of just a test. How far is this person willing to go to help me? And then we ended up doing a deal, and he's, one of my most supportive investors as well.
So let's shift gears a little bit, talk about building culture. So you've got this term, eating fire, to describe the type of people that you want to hire. You need people who can produce incredible amounts of output, highly productive in this constrained environment. How do you create a culture where you can set the bar really high for people without getting burned out? How do you index for those types of people at the hiring process?
And if I'm being transparent, I still don't think we're really good at it. Myself included, it's hard to assess that. I was having breakfast with Greg Abel, the incoming CEO of Berkshire Hathaway. He happens to be local to Des Moines where I am, and talk about a variety of topics. And I just asked him, like, how do you assess and find good operators for your portfolio companies? He's like, I still struggle with this. It's hard. So it resonates across the industry. I think there's certain key personality components that end up contributing to a good operator and good fire eater, somebody who can juggle the madness and do it with grace. What is this person's like disposition for learning? So I ask, like, what kind of media do you consume and how often, how frequently, and what is it? Is it film? Like, are you watching Netflix? And, what kind of recommendations are you going to give me based on your watch list? Do you consume news? Where do you get it from? Is it from TikTok or is it from periodicals? What kind of books do you read? What kind of podcasts do you listen to? And which ones did you give me as recommendations? And so from that, based on what their answers are, then that sort of leads me to my next questions of like, okay, let's talk about some random topics. So if they said, I like the documentary Man-Eater, hunting's fascinating to me. And I'm like, great, let's talk about hunting for 15 minutes. And it's a question of like, can you carry on a conversation about random topics with me for 10 to 15 minutes? Like that shows me a level of interest in learning that's far beyond normal day-to-day routine. And that disposition to learn, I think, is a very good leading indicator on can this person juggle a lot and do they have the desire to juggle a lot?
You're a comprehensive digital health infrastructure provider. You're full stack, covering billing, scheduling, licensing, prescriptions, everything bundled together. You're reaching over 2 million patients a year, more than 16,000 clinicians. You're active in all 50 states. The scale is impressive. What are you kind of most proud of today, and where do you think things are going next?
I think there's three things. First and foremost, the patients that we've had, reading and hearing about some of the success stories of what we've done, watching the amount of patients that we service on a monthly basis has been incredible. I mean, we went from celebrating the first patient that we saw to then celebrating when we were seeing 10 patients a month to then celebrating when we were seeing 100,000 patients a month. Now we're well in excess of 100,000 patients a month that we see and treat. The second thing is the team that we built. I find it a privilege to get to work next to some of the smartest people I've ever met, much smarter than myself, and built lifelong relationships as part of that. Some of my investors even showed up to my wedding and were there to celebrate that day with me. And the third component of it all, I think, is just the community. Being able to give back. We've helped Techstars and some different things. Sometimes I'll go talk with some of the local universities and talk to their students. We've done stuff and given back to the community a variety of ways. And I think that's been something we're really proud of as well.
It's a good segue to talking about Iowa. This show is about outsiders, people proving that you can have success building tech companies outside the traditional hubs, outside traditional backgrounds that we're told are what a tech entrepreneur is supposed to look like. You and OpenLoop are an excellent example of that. You've had state support, the venture connections. The company's name is on a building in downtown Des Moines. Many founders with your level of ambition feel pulled to the coast or maybe even cajoled by their investor base, but not you. What is so important about it to you? And what have been the biggest advantages of building the company there?
Living in the pain of what we're trying to fix. Witnessing it firsthand, having to experience it firsthand, that is the biggest advantage. Finding and recruiting talent in the Midwest, very difficult. Finding and attracting investors in the Midwest, incredibly difficult. Fundamentally, there is a pride, though, for us, Christian and I, being Midwestern folks, that we want to build the Midwest into a place where companies want to build. We want to fix a lot of those disadvantages that we've been through in this community. We want talent to be in the Midwest. We want people to move here because it's a lower cost of living. And our way to fix those problems is by making this a hub. And we're trying to do our part in that. But you are the sum of the people that you spend the most amount of time with. And, we're a relatively mobile culture nowadays. Airlines are easy to hop on. So I spent a lot of time in New York. We have an office there. I spent a lot of time in the Bay. We have people there and our investors are there. So it's easy to still get the mindset advantages of the coast by spending time there. But if I want to give back and contribute to my home state in the ways that I hope, we're going to build this company into a world-class organization that attracts the best-in-class talent. And we're going to put Iowa on the map because of it.
Having studied and experienced how thriving startup communities evolve, it requires those initial successes and then the people behind those successes to stay involved, to build additional companies, to back the next generation of founders. The entrepreneurial ecosystem from a tech perspective is still pretty nascent in Des Moines, but it's evolving. If you could fix one thing today, what would it be? And looking ahead, how do you see yourself contributing to the next generation of entrepreneurs?
It's an excellent question, Ian. I think it is still nascent. There's some really good foundational work that I believe is going on. I think Curdy was a part of that with starting the Techstars Iowa program. The Des Moines Chamber of Commerce is one of the top in the country. It's called the Greater Des Moines Partnership. They have a full startup team that helps provide resources. And so there is some really good framework to help bring an ideation to initial commercialization. You need to have more people like us that want to contribute, that want to build a company there, because those success stories provide the inspiration for the next layer down. The people who want to stay in Iowa, who may have opted to leave for the coast because they saw no other former examples of somebody doing something big in this state. So if you get more and more of those success stories, they're great funders for the next generation. They're great mentors for the next generation. And it's that visibility of experience from the success stories that help give a leg up to the next generation, right? If I can inspire the next 20 companies that come out of the University of Iowa by telling my story, and then maybe one day help fund some of those, and then they can rely on the experience of what OpenLoop went through, then they're in a much better spot than we were. They already have a leg up. So my contribution back one day, I hope, can be financial. It's currently right now mentorship. It's a shared experience. It's advisory, consultative. That's what I can do right now, but hopefully one day it can be more.
A consistent theme that we've had on this show is talking about balancing the demands of building these high growth companies in such an intense environment, balancing those demands with being a whole human, how difficult it can be to balance family, relationships, finding personal fulfillment. Any tips you have, things that have been helpful for you to balance that professional life and your personal life, whether it's staying healthy or having fun, maintaining relationships, anything that's worked well for you?
When I figure it out, I'll let you know.
Well, maybe I'll ask it differently. Where do you feel like you're falling down most, and what do you wish you were doing better?
I think startups are all about compromise. It's really hard to build a startup if you don't have a spouse that's supportive of it. And oftentimes that support comes from a compromise, right? So there might be a trade-off like, hey, I'm going to bust my ass for the next 10 years on building this company. But in return, once it is over, here's what I'll provide back. Here's what I can do. This means more time at home with the kids that allows us to do X, Y, or Z. I think it's also trying to figure out how to balance the other things that are important to you or weave them into this passion of yours, right? Because startups are an all or none kind of thing. If you're going to build a company and build it to the level of success that you want, it's a full dive into the deep end sort of thing. And so things that have worked well for me, I lose my sanity if I don't do stuff with my hands. Every evening when I come home, I like to figure out some sort of project. A lot of nights it's just as simple as doing the cooking myself so I can work with my hands and then think strategically. Other times it's doing remodels. I like to flip houses or working on old cars, old motorcycles. But during that time, those are components that don't require my thoughts to be with them so I can think strategically about OpenLoop. But am I anywhere close to having that balance figured out? Absolutely not.
It is a compromise. You need to have alignment at home, and you need to have something to look forward to outside of work to kind of keep you sane. When you look back at everything that you've accomplished so far, and really when you look ahead to what is still to come and what OpenLoop can be, what do you hope is the impact that you will have had on the community, on your employees, and ultimately your customers?
So I think for the people that have worked at OpenLoop, our culture is not for everybody. I want our employees not to look back and say, oh, that was the best place I ever worked necessarily. I want them to look back and be like, that was a place that challenged me the most, and that's where I grew the most as a professional. For our clients, I'd love for them to look back and be like, we would not have accomplished what we did if it weren't for OpenLoop helping us get there. For the average patient and consumer out there who's digesting our services, I want people to look back in 20 years now and say OpenLoop redefined how healthcare was delivered. We think traditional healthcare is broken, and it's only broken for one simple reason. That's just that it's highly inconvenient. And if it's inconvenient, people don't use it. It becomes less accessible, and it becomes a really high cost center because if you don't use it, That means you only then use it if you are really, really sick. Then you go in and actually get care. Instead, if we reimagine it from the outside in and say, we need to make it incredibly convenient, therefore make it incredibly accessible, which then leads to ubiquity of it, which lowers costs and ushers in a new era of preventative medicine. At that point, we redefined healthcare completely.
I love that. We're almost out of time, but here on Outsider Inc., we like to finish with a little segment we call Beyond the Bio. These are just some quick hit questions that let us step away from your resume and really dig into you.
Oh boy, here we go.
Yeah, it's time. Okay, so what's a quick piece of advice that a mentor's given you that stuck with you throughout your journey?
One of the first mentors I ever had, he said the best CEOs and founders I've ever worked with don't care about the dollars and cents. They have a mental picture of the entire industry that they are serving, and they know the piping of it. They know who pays who, and they know why that person pays that person. They know all the inputs and all the outputs of the industry. So that's resonated with me.
Who is an unsung hero in your life, and what has been the impact they've had on you?
You know, as cliche as it sounds, probably my dad, very risk adverse sort of guy, but just a man of the utmost integrity, willing to go above and beyond to stand by what he believes is the truth, regardless of how people feel about him because of that. Am I at that level yet? Absolutely not. It's something that I aspire to be, and I have a lot of respect for him in that.
Well, I'm sure he's proud of you today and glad that you did not follow in his footsteps. Who's someone in your local startup community or in your broader network who doesn't get enough credit and deserves a shout out?
My first investor and former board chair, a guy named Dick Ferguson. At the time that I met him, prior to starting OpenLoop, I was in my second year of medical school, and he was 78 at the time. Elderly gentleman who had built up ACT, like the test company that you take for college admittance, into the behemoth that it was. He took it from like a company of like 5 employees and made it the premier college admittance test. And then I've been doing startups ever since then. Now he's 82 or 83, and I still call him and give him updates on the business, but he has been the biggest champion of OpenLoop. He's given me some of the best advice, and he gave me the confidence and courage to take a leap of faith on myself and start this thing.
Awesome. Tell us something most people don't know about you, something outside of work, could be a hobby, favorite travel spot, a guilty pleasure, or maybe even a hidden talent.
I love the outdoors. My dream goal someday is to move back to a farm and just be a cattle rancher. Right now, I have a chicken coop in the backyard and get the fresh eggs every morning. But yeah, that's the dream. I think one hidden talent, for some reason, I found unicycles really interesting when I was in middle school. So
wow.
I'm a pretty good unicycle rider. I haven't been on one in a few years, but I think I could still do it.
Well, that's original. What are 1 or 2 songs you'd like to add to our Spotify Founders playlist? Something that maybe fuels your workday or has inspired you on your journey as an entrepreneur.
I got 2 on opposite ends of the spectrum. If I just need some motivation, this is going to date me a little bit, but Remember the Name by Fort Minor. Great pump up song. Nothing gets me more amped up. And then the last one correlates to my ultimate goal of just getting back to the land. And that is Buy Dirt, country song. Jordan Davis is the artist in that last one.
Okay. Got it. All right. Last question. If you could give one piece of advice to someone who's about to start their founder's journey, particularly someone who's a bit of an outsider like you, what would it be?
Yeah, I'm going to steal it from Nike. I've used this over and over again, but you just do it. You just got to do it. I think there's a million people who have really good ideas. They could be world changing, highly impactful, but it's just a lack of action. So if you're going to do it, jump all in, put both feet in and chase after it.
That's a great way to end. Jon, thanks so much for being here. Congratulations on all the success you've been having and will continue to have. I can't wait to share this episode with our listeners.
Sounds great, Ian. Thanks again for having me. Really appreciated it.
That's a wrap for today's episode of Outsider Inc. A big thank you to Jon Lensing for taking us inside his journey. From handwritten letters in a Hy-Vee cafe to a $1 billion plus valuation today, all while building from Iowa with purpose. Jon reminds us that constraints create diamonds, that great co-founders are complementary, not carbon copies, and that the best decisions often come as much from instinct as data. And there's a quieter lesson too. Success in outsider places doesn't come with fanfare. It's earned in the spaces between big moments, when the term sheet falls through, when payroll's tight, or when you decide to pivot before the market validates you. Jon's story is proof that staying the course in the face of steep odds can pay off big. If you want more from Outsider Inc., don't forget to subscribe to the platform at outsiderinc.substack.com. It's packed with highlights from today's episode and bonus insights you won't want to miss. You can follow Outsider Inc. on YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, and LinkedIn at Outsider Inc. Pod. You can also follow me on X at Ian Hathaway. Outsider Inc. is produced by Spellbinder Media. We'll be back soon with another fascinating outsider conversation. Until then, thank you so much for listening, and remember, great entrepreneurs can come from anywhere. See you next time.